Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Ascension again. It is great to be with you and great to be with you online as well. As Luke said, my name is Amanda, and we have entered the season of Lent. And this means that the times, they are changing. The days have been getting longer, the nights have been getting shorter. And there are actually some bluebells outside. I don't know if you saw them when you came in. And the sun is shining. And I don't know about you, but that fills me with joy. And it makes me think ahead to warmer climates and sunglasses and holidays. And the one place that I would go to on holiday, like a shot, would be Italy. You've got pasta and pizza and gelato, amazing things in life. You've got sunshine and you have beautiful architecture and art. And when I was a student back in the day, I studied history of art. And there is nothing that I love more than going into a gallery and basically staring at all of the paintings. And the place I would go to on holiday would be the Arena Chapel in Padua. And there should be a slide coming up of it. And this is in Italy, and as you can see, it is covered with paintings from head to foot by an artist called Giotto di Bondone. And this would be my ultimate destination. And all of these paintings that you can see, they depict the life of Christ. They illustrate, if you like, stories from the Bible. And in the 14th century, when this was painted, this was quite common because a lot of people couldn't read. So actually images were really helpful to explain the stories of the Bible and to show them to people. So one of the ways to relate to what Jesus said was through art. And if you haven't been here before, or if you're here for the first time in a few weeks, like Luke was saying, we're going through this series looking at spending time with God, or the practice of what Christians sometimes call a quiet time. And last week, Marcus was looking at different ways of reading the Bible. And this week, I want to talk about two things, and about engaging our imaginations and recapturing the wonder. And for me, paintings do that. So art and photos, they bring back memories, they bring emotions. And they tell stories, just like Jesus told stories. And this painting from the Arena Chapel, which should be the next slide, is called The Kiss of Judas. And it's one of my favorite paintings. And it's the same story that James just read to us when Jesus has been praying in the garden, and then the soldiers come and arrest him. And just while it's up on the screen, why don't you look at it and sort of begin to think again about what happened in that moment. And I'm going to read a few of those verses again. So now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. And do you see the spears and the flames? That evocative sense of the moment when Jesus is about to be seized. Peter is moving to cut off the soldier's ear, but before that, in the throng, there's this sudden moment of Jesus and Judas interacting, and the calm gaze of Christ as he allows the one who has betrayed him to come completely into his physical space and greet him with a kiss. And there's this incredible intent gaze. Images are so helpful to illustrate Bible stories. And the good news is that I do not need to go to Padua on a plane, fun though that would be, just to imagine this story. And we don't need to be Italian painters. We can imagine the story for ourselves. The Franciscan monk, St. Ignatius of Loyola, lived in a time when people weren't really connecting with the Bible. And he encouraged a kind of spiritual practice, if you like, for a quiet time of entering into the story for yourself, to actually imagine what it might have been like to have been there. So we can imagine what was it like to be a disciple in the garden at this moment, to hear the sounds of the soldiers, what emotions were being ignited as they realized what Judas had done. How did Jesus react? What did it smell like? What time of day was it? What were they wearing? And it's a great way and a simple way to engage with the Bible, to pause and place yourself in the scene, even to see yourself in the story. And then maybe to write down what has just happened and what you noticed. To ask Jesus to speak with you, maybe just to reveal one thing, and then to thank him for what he has shown you. It's one way to engage. And we live such busy lives that to pause, to stop, and to re-engage our imaginations can maybe feel a little bit foreign to us now. And the Arena Chapel, this chapel filled with paintings, it took a long time to paint. But we live in the age of the instant image, don't we, of cameras out every moment, and curated images on social media as well. And you can even make a living as an influencer by sort of encouraging other people to wear or buy what you're selling, what your house looks like, to buy a kind of lifestyle that has been curated on screen. And the problem with this sort of instant consumer society is not only do we maybe switch off our imaginations, but we also lose our sense of wonder. And as we think about quiet times, we can think about re-engaging our imaginations, but also to recapture that wonder. And the first thing that God does in the Bible, right in Genesis 1, is to create. He creates the heavens and the earth, the sun and the sky, the trees and the waters, and the teeming fish and the birds that throng the air. And the other thing that I love about art is the number of colours that you need to paint something. I'm a country bumpkin, self-confessed, and I grew up surrounded by trees. And I don't know if you've ever looked at a tree and thought about the sheer numbers of green that are in leaves. And then they change as the light changes, as the wind changes, and it sort of ripples through all the leaves. Or if you look at bark, it isn't just brown, it's silver. It's grey, it's green and blue and brown, and maybe occasionally a little hint of lilac. There is so much beauty around us when we stop and look. We need to recover some of that wonder. And in our passage, there's a moment where Jesus asks the soldiers in verse 4 who they're looking for. And then reading from verse 5, Jesus replied, "I am he." And when Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Jesus speaks and claims his identity, and everyone around him is overcome. And in that moment of saying, "I am he," Jesus is actually claiming a title of God. In the Old Testament, when God reveals himself, he says, "I am who I am." And actually, Jesus says right at this very moment, not only am I Jesus of Nazareth, the man, but actually I am Jesus, the Messiah. I am God. And the soldiers fall back because they've suddenly encountered the presence of God. They've seen something of God revealed in that moment, and it's like, whoa. And have you ever suddenly realized when something has happened and it's an answer to prayer, and you suddenly realize that God was moving in that situation and you hadn't realized it, and it's like, whoa. Or you suddenly have that inkling of just how good he's been, and it's kind of, whoo. Or when you've somehow, in a way that's quite difficult to articulate, have felt the Spirit move in some way, and you suddenly realize that God was here and I just didn't see it before. And it helps to bring back the wonder. Brian Heasley, who wrote this book, Be Still, the one that Luke was talking about, talks about how his perspective changed when he deliberately spent time looking back over his day and consciously noticing the presence of God, being intentional, if you like, with his attention. Not living in this instant society, but pausing to reflect and to notice. And he asked himself the question, where did I see God today? Where did God reveal himself to me? And when we start to recognize God, we recover some of that sense of wonder. Actually, you were here and I just didn't realize it. We begin to see him in the daily, ordinary things. And that is another way to pray. So when we have this practice of a quiet time, we start looking for God. And that can shape us to be what the people of God were meant to be, a people of hope. People who look forward, not necessarily meaning that we have to ignore suffering when we encounter it, but making a practice of paying attention to the presence of God. I am he. And that stance, which is alert for God's presence, begins to encounter him more and more. It's almost like training a muscle of attention. And it increases faith, making us people of hope. And it also leads to thankfulness. And this is so miles away from the kind of quick fix gratification from an instant consumer culture. When you get that kind of sugar high for 5 minutes, and then you're restless and sad in the long term because it can't satisfy you. This is recapturing the wonder through knowing God, and in that wonder, cultivating gratitude. And thankfulness, it leads to worship. And I love the worship leader, Graham Kendrick, who said about worship that it has been misunderstood as something that arises from a feeling that comes upon you. But it is vital that we understand that it is rooted in a conscious act of the will. In other words, worship, it isn't feelings dependent, but it is a conscious act of the will. We choose to worship God because worship is for God. And when I draw near to him, he draws near to me, and my soul is lifted. And I wonder if anyone else here has ever experienced that lifting of your soul in the time of worship. In this passage of John, Jesus went to pray and to worship God to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is the place that Jesus went to be filled with strength again. And he needed it because this was the night where he knew that he was going to the cross. And Judas knew where to find Jesus, as it says in verse 2, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. In Luke's gospel of this version of this story, it says he went there as usual to pray. Doesn't that say a lot about Jesus? He had a practice of prayer and of worship, and he also had a place. He went to a garden. And when I think about gardens, I often think about my mum, because my mum is an obsessive, devoted gardener. She loves gardens. And I know that for her, her garden is a place of sanctuary. It's a place of creativity and of rest. But it's also a place of battle sometimes with weeds and frost and with squirrels. And it's a place of beauty. It's a place to marvel and to pray. And I wonder if Jesus also valued the quiet and the beauty. If the garden was a place to encounter God, because it was that space that enabled him to look up, excuse me, and to wonder and to recognize his Father again. And in that encounter, to come back to a place of worship. And it was the place that he went to do battle as well. In Luke's gospel, when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane the night that he is arrested, it says he sweats drops of blood. But from encountering God, he is able to say, "Not my will, but yours be done." And I know for myself that I am so much better equipped to face life's hardships or the day's struggle when I've spent time with God in prayer first. So as we journey through Lent, looking at this practice together of having a quiet time, let's consciously choose to look up and to see Jesus more clearly. We can re-engage our imaginations, not just reading the Bible as a script, but really seeing the story come to life. And we can recover that sense of wonder, giving our attention to God, noticing his presence and giving thanks. And we're going to celebrate communion this morning. And the passage that we have just heard read to us speaks of the God who gave himself willingly for us, a beautiful sacrifice for us. And in this time, you might want to engage your imagination with this story again. And I wonder if we could just have the painting up again for a few minutes and picture what Jesus went through that night when he willingly chose to go the way of the cross. Or it might be an opportunity to look up and wonder again at the God who gave himself willingly for us. In verse 11, Jesus commands Peter to put away his sword, to not battle this moment. He says, "Shall I not drink the cup that my Father has given me?" This is the God that we worship, who willingly gives himself away for us. This is our God. Amen.